Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the GSOA webinar, looking at some of our activities in terms of the future secure SATCOM environment. My name is Paul Wells. I've been asked to try and chair against these erstwhile experts that we've got alongside us. So I'd like to introduce Bob Potter from Global Invacom, Stuart Sanders from SES, Dave Davis from ST Engineering iDirect, and Andrew Staniland from MDA. Good afternoon, all. My background is very much on SATCOM space, but also more recently, and actually where I started my career is on military SATCOM, and particularly in the world where we are today, which is an ever-changing world in space, but particularly in SATCOM. I look at things from a defense perspective. How do we actually counter the threats? So at the end of the day, the UK as a nation and actually all our allies are able to maintain that critical global connectivity. That is so reliant on today's industry for everything that is provided, and it's great to see the panel here today. The threat continuum is something you'll hear all the way through the session. And it's really covering everything from the worst case scenario, which would be all out nuclear exchange, and hopefully and doubtfully we'll get there, but we have to prepare for that, right the way through to classic threats of interference, denial, jamming, interruptions with our space assets. So understanding that threat continuum is actually quite key from a defense and a security point of view, and it's something that is becoming more and more from the satellite operators. Where we're looking now is that diversity of solutions covering from those highly hardened core military for that last ditch survivable critical command and control, right the way through to the extensive use, and I know majority of nations use extensively commercial SATCOM, and what can be done to protect those commercial SATCOMs until in the unfortunate event that you may actually lose them due to enemy activities towards what you're trying to do. And certainly from a UK MOD point of view, and also I can say from an allied nation point of view as well, we work very closely with our allies globally. We're looking very much more about how we do that hybrid SATCOM networking and how we bring what has always been the legacy primary, alternate, contingent, and emergency comms plans, and actually how do we get more flexible to adapt to the threats that are now facing us in a really challenging environment. So that's the introduction. What I'd like to do is to now go through a conversation with all the panel. The first question is, how are your organizations adapting to delivering that military communications in this really new stressed world to provide that resilient SATCOMs as you do? And I'd like to first go to Dave Davis on that question.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So what I would say is there's two elements to this. There's the technical element and then there's the human element. So on the technical side, we are building platform which is multi-orbit, multi-frequency, has that pace, that primary, alternate, contingency, emergency built into it. And allows you to flex between. With the critical element of that is a network management system as well, which allows you to have that flexibility. But also it's partnerships, it's collaboration. So it's working with organizations that would be considered legacy competitors. We're now working with those organizations to make sure that the end user and our partners have the best technologies available, but also they can switch between technologies. So importing waveforms onto our device, and we have here the 450 modem. It can host up to 7 waveforms, so we could have an SCPC waveform on there, we could have a sovereign waveform, and then there's the traditional iDirect waveforms as well. So it can be all things to all users. But we've got to remember that it's not just SATCOM. We also need to work with other partners that do tropospheric scatter, UHF, HF, etc., etc. So, and more, we're looking at new technologies like optical links. We're seeing the 5G world where non-terrestrial and terrestrial networks are combining together. And one of the core things we're looking at, we call it A3, it's AI tools, it's an analytics, and it's also the automation. So the end user doesn't have to do any of the actual manual switching. It's all done for them automatically before they know it's going to happen. So those are the key things that we have. Also, additional technologies like low probability of interception, anti-jam, and all that sort of thing. But then you get into a difficult world of export control, and you have to manage that quite sort of well as well. So we really have to have that balance between providing the best options, but also I think it comes down to education, and that's where the human element comes in, where people don't rely on this too much, that you have that mission command. So that if you do lose one com stream, how to get across the other com stream, how to work with no communications as well. So there's that always the human element we have to consider.
Thank you, Dave. Some really good, interesting views coming in there as to where the world is, and thank you for that. Bob?
Thank you, Paul. So we're Global Infocom, probably more traditionally known as a VSAT provider or a transceiver provider. Our pivot towards Milcom is to actually integrate and provide a terminal solution. And for resiliency, essentially a quick deploy terminal. So that in the event of any emergencies or contingencies, we can quickly pack up the terminal and move elsewhere. We've developed an XY terminal because that gives us multi-orbit in the simplest possible configuration. And essentially, the antennas are made up of four major modules, which are all interchangeable, which provides us multi-band capability, integrated with our transceiver technology. Transceiver is both the LMB and the buck, along with OMT and TRF and antenna horn or antenna feed tube. So simplifying the deployment of the entire application with the mount integrated with our antenna control unit, an interchangeable manual or motorized pedestal, and then the reflector. Those remain common, and then you simply connect up the correct RF and feed tube, and you're ready to auto deploy onto any of the satellite constellations or geo satellites that are available. Then finally, we are looking at standards for interfacing, for control, and for the data plane. We have our standard L-band as the data plane right now. We're capable of hosting Diffie connected devices so that we would have digital RF over IP connectivity. Or indeed, latterly, we've been looking at IQ for greater bandwidth and greater resiliency of data in terms of direct conversion of the data to RF. And essentially, with the XY terminal, we're capable of any of the four major orbit connectivities. We have electronic pole switching built into our transceivers, so that offers greater flexibility. So in terms of beam switching in the event of any interference or malfeasance, I suppose, in the RF domain. And then similarly, satellite hopping. The XY allows us to then flip from, let's say, from MEO to GEO or even to LEO if it was available. And I think in the future we'll be looking towards hosting SDRs and those multi waveforms, or God forbid that satellite actually becomes a standard and we actually have a standard waveform, and so therefore we can have network roaming.
Cool. Again, some good themes there in terms of that multi-orbit, multi-tracking, fast and adaptive switching. So good links there between both of you. What about it from the satellite operator's point of view? Stuart, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about what is a really interesting topic. Takes a lot of my time at the companies for good reason. I think one of the key things in adapting to the challenge is dialogue. And I think the dynamic with the government customers has changed a lot from a hard sell to really a constructive dialogue and a willingness to be open about what we can do and what we can't do, what we can deliver on their plans, trying to influence their plans, of course, but to truly listen. I was responsible for delivering the O3B Mpower program, one of the key parts there. So we will tend to talk about technical solutions, but I think it's also really important to understand a commercial aspect to what we're delivering to the customer. It has to be supported by the technical capabilities, but the MGS contract, which we put in place on O3B Mpower, which is a NATO contract, so any NATO member can come in without having to renegotiate the terms, is inherently flexible. It allows the user community to move capacity globally from region to region, allows them to bring their own equipment, and we have a certification program to do that. It supports tactical waveform because it's not a closed system. It's an open bent pipe. These kind of features, I think, are things that we need to make sure we continue to support going forward. And the term hybrid networks in the government context can mean a lot of different things. You can take it to be multi-orbit. You can take it to mean some combination of ground. And as Dave said, it isn't just about satellite. It could be other systems. So we need to be open to all of those. And you do that by having flexible solutions, working to open standards, and making sure that whatever our technical roadmaps are, and whether it's stuff we're doing in-house more and more or with vendors, that it's well understood by the customer. You look to get feedback on that technical roadmap, what's going to work for them and what's not, and you're ready to adapt and react. At a human level, as Dave referred to it, I think it's really important that we have people within our community that can talk apples to apples with the customer base, be they ex-service people. I hired a lot of people from the Skynet program some years ago when setting up operations at New Skies, and that's been a big boon. And we're growing our presence in the UK to support the Aurora Skynet delivery wrap with those kind of specialists. But being able to have a rich operations guide to operations discussion, so really being able to get meaningful threat information about what's going on in a secure environment, of course, but to make sure it gets to the right people. And I think one of the things that I keep coming back to is ideally governments would like to be able to, as you say, have a resilient layered solution that includes their pure sovereign, government-owned, government-operated solutions with commercial solutions. But the commercial solutions, they can go in and get what they need when they need it. There's a commercial challenge in doing that, of course, a technical one in the sense you've got to be able to produce what is sometimes referred to as orchestrator of orchestrators. So each company will have their own resource and orchestration tools. You want an overlay that the government can use to go in and grab those. Technically, that's fine, but on a commercial footing, we need to make sure that the commercial interests are protected. We can't be commoditized because it won't work financially, and those services won't be provided into the pool. So it's a challenge that can be solved. It just needs to be discussed. And I'll stop there.
Oh no, thank you, Stuart. Again, all three have added some really meaningful points there. I'll come back to that commoditized approach, and as we go into some of the further questions, which is how can we do it so that we can easily interface actually into the commercial services that are out there, so it is effectively off the shelf buying, and how do we integrate that? Well, I'll come back to that. Don't forget, I see there's one question has come in. You can raise questions through. We're not there yet in terms of opening to the audience, but we will get there in terms of those questions. And finally, for this opening question, I'd really like to get Andy's view on this activity.
Well, thanks, Paul. It's always nice going last, because you can just agree with everybody else that came before you. I think I do agree with everybody's points. I think they're very good points. I think one thing that we haven't really touched on is, MilSatcom's an odd basket within the SATCOM world. We go quite a little bit slower than the rest of the SATCOM market and the SATCOM development. And what that means is we tend to talk about things for a whole long time before they actually become the norm. So, we've had hybrid networks for 20 years. They just weren't designed that way. They evolved. Skynet 5 has multi-orbit, it has multi-frequencies, it has multi-providers, and it's had that since the early 2000s. It just wasn't designed as a hybrid network, so it's more mandrolic in order to manage it. And now we're really talking about designing a hybrid network that covers all the things that Stuart talked about. And that's something that's important to think about, because sometimes it can be a burden. The pace of change is a little bit slower. The way that, I'm sure we'll talk about it in some of the future questions, the way that defense procurement happens doesn't probably go as fast as we want, but it does allow us to be more flexible and change the direction of where we want to go while things are evolving. And I think that's something we have to bear in mind. If you look at a couple of things, I think digital payloads, we talked about those when I was a graduate 30 odd years ago. And we were designing them, but we weren't really launching them very often. And now almost every satellite is a digital payload. And MDA is no different. That's the thing that we're working on, software-defined satellites, so that we can modify things in orbit. I think the other thing is the way geopolitics has just turned everything on its head in the last couple of years. We were moving very, very rapidly towards far more commercial SATCOM, far more alliances, the own access collaborate model that we talk about a lot in the UK, with a very hefty emphasis on the access and collaborate. 2 years of geopolitics, and suddenly sovereignty is on the table again. However you want to decide it, define it, and describe it, people are looking for in-country manufacturing, in-country design and ownership of their systems, and the trust in commercial SATCOM, which really wasn't there 10 years ago. And companies like SES and others have really, really worked hard to change that mindset. It's coming back in the discussion again. And I think that lends itself to a little bit of flexible thinking and different ways of working. I think the other thing that I just want to touch on, Dave talked about at the beginning, the people side of things, the ability to think differently is going to become even more important, I think, than the technology going forward. One example from my new company, I've only been here a few months, in Canada, is the ESCP program, Escape, where it's a polar comms satellite system for the Canadian government. It's been the brainchild of very many people over 20 odd years. It's going to happen. But what was announced recently wasn't a contract, it was a partnership between MDA, who will make the spacecraft, Telesat, who will operate the spacecraft, and the customer, who will together collaboratively design what they want to happen as part of an MOU partnership. It's not, let's spend 2 or 3 years designing it, put it out to tender, and then buy something. It's, we're going to work in partnership and collaboration to really build together and buy what we want. And that comes back to Dave's point of the people working together to make the right things first time out. And that's a change we haven't really seen in the past for all the different collaborations that we've done. I'll pause there so you can move on to the next question.
No, thank you, Andrew. And again, so that picks in that collaboration point. From a government perspective, the allied collaboration is getting stronger and stronger. And I know from what SES is doing, and Stuart may start to cover some of this, the fantastic collaboration against a number of partners for Iris Square. And you can start to see that, Canadians are doing it, Europe's doing that. There's some really good trend setting going on, all driven by the geopolitics of the current time. We got 2 fantastic questions. I've got them both, and I'll pass them into the panel afterwards. But I just want to dive into another one. I'm just going to pick and keep Andrew on online for this one. The next question is really, apart from funding, what things would you like governments to feed in to help your offerings? Is that better user cases, better threat briefings, better procurement? Just really wondered on your views. I'll go to Andy on that one first, and then Stuart. Back to you, Andrew.
Thanks for making me go first. Normally, when I sit on these panels, we always talk about going faster, and we very glibly talk about having an intelligent customer. Both of those things are important, as is more money. But I think they're a bit glib. They're hard to deliver. So, what would make a difference? I think, obviously, what Canada has done on Escape is really, I think, trailblazing, game changing. I hope it works, because if it does work, it's a model that lots of nations will use with their national champion and with their national operators, or with their chosen partners on both those fronts. I hope that works. I think historically, through my entire career, governments have been very nervous of open collaboration with industry, and that sometimes works, mostly just increases delay and cost. And I think if it can work with Escape, I think it's a very, very good model to implement elsewhere. I think one thing that would change the world quite significantly is the ability to say on the government side, you know what, we've got this requirement wrong. We have to stop, and not let the momentum and the argument of sunk costs in decision making keep going on the wrong path. I think Satcoms is moving pretty fast. I don't personally think it's moving too fast for government to jump on board with decision making, but I do think the way that we approach in all countries decision making and procurement, we've let it get out of hand. It now goes too slowly. Some of that is we're wedded to something that's going to be obsolete by the time it's launched or manufactured or built, if not already obsolete in the procurement phase. And it's really difficult. I'm not suggesting I've got the answer to this. It's really difficult for civil servants and uniformed people to go, do you know what? We've done this wrong. We have to stop and do something new. But I do think with the pace of change and the necessity to know what's going on around the world in different manufacturers, melding together new space, old space, and that kind of stuff, you've got to be able to say, we've learned a lot from where we got to, but what we learned is we're doing the wrong thing. We have to start again. And I think that would be a game changer.
Cool, thank you. And I've seen the questions coming in the chat. There's a Q&A section as well if you want to use that. And so I've captured that sovereignty question as we go. Following on from Andrew there, Stuart, anything further to add?
Well, I covered a couple of points in the opening remarks that I think the right kind of dialogue with the government is really important, to have more direct feedback on the use cases rather than just going to meetings, present, say, oh, thank you very much. For them to actually say, well, that's not what we need, that's not what we want. That's the kind of brutal, if you will, feedback we need to make sure that we can deliver in a timely manner, meaningful ops to ops threat briefings to make sure that that can be actioned. I think the single biggest difference is the procurement processes. It's the government. It's very difficult to find the decision makers, and while everybody may say that's a great thing, we really want it, but how do you walk out of the room knowing that you can deliver on the ask, which is a very different thing than generally is the case with the commercial world. In the terms of dealing with vendors and what we're buying, supply chain vetting, I think we've really stepped up our ability to work with industry to make sure that it addresses these valid concerns. Equipment not being delivered with admin as a login and password, and making sure we know enough about the supply chain. But equally, I think we need to get proactive briefings from the government on where they expect to see supply chain issues, where they may be calling us out in the future and saying, actually, we don't want equipment from this, that, or the other, or this company, so that we can get ahead of it. It's no good telling us after the fact when we're halfway through delivering a project. And the more that we can integrate with their testing or have them use our test facilities to validate stuff, the better. We're more than open to doing that. It's engagement on all of these things, I think, is the key thing. And we will up our game, but we need to get the feedback.
No, and I really do take that point there on that conversational piece. It's very easy to say, right, a technical spec or a spec for assured capability or assured supply chain, but actually it's that dialogue is the way I read what you put there, Stuart, to to bring in. I think there's some really good points there. I'm taking some quite good notes on this one as well, because I think this can come in and feed how we go about looking at the overall new space environment, not just SATCOM going forward from a defense perspective. My next question before we go to the open questions, and thank you, the questions are now starting to flow in, and I'm going to go to Bob first and then Dave. What technical developments do you see as being needed for this future hybrid SATCOM networks? And I know you both mentioned things in your introductions. I just wondered if you've got anything sort of further to ask before we open the question to the participants. Bob, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think essentially all I'd like to add is to a certain extent standards. I know that's not always the right thing in the military world with standard waveform, but it does allow, I guess, to a certain extent, a degree of security, because you can then join your multiple networks. You can or beam hop, or even, I mentioned satellite hop. But with that in itself offers a certain amount of security if it's done in a certain way. And I think with the SDR approach, it's one thing being able to provide the hardware platform, that i.e. an SDR, but then you have to kind of rely on the content providers, shall we call them, the people who are showing up with the waveforms. And whether they actually want it to be hosted or not. And we are not a waveform company, but I think that's the part of what we need to be looking at. I think in the future we're looking at multi-beam. Multi-beam offers a high degree of low probability of intercept if used correctly. And I think we'll start to see technology evolve. You kind of already have that with flat panels, if you like, or ESAs, which brings its own issues and problems. There is no silver bullet, shall we say, about SATCOM. But I think as looking to solve that problem of gaining the benefits of high gain by using reflectors, with the high-speed beam switching of using electronically steered arrays, I think we'll start to see some innovative solutions around combining those two technologies.
Cool, thank you, Bob. Dave?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that really, and the fact that it is going to be very much that standards driven, everyone working together. And we saw Viasat try to do this, sort of like something like 15 years ago with the Chameleon, as they called it then, this multi-waveform capability. But actually, we just need people to work together, and it's that almost government forcing people to work together. But what's actually happened that I found really interesting over the last 2 to 3 years, it's actually a competitive platform that's forced us all to work together. The elephant in the room is Starlink. Amazon Leo is no doubt going to be adding weight to that and having its own unique impact, although I think they're probably going to be more collaborative than Starlink ever were. And I think really Starlink has forced a lot of organizations to start working together. And we've seen a lot of consolidation in the last 2 years, and I think that will still continue to happen. But for me, the specific technology enabler is going to be those antennas. The antennas are there right now, however, they're not at the right price. We really need to start getting those mass produced, get the price down, get them on smaller vehicles, and we'll see that sort of start to happen over a period of time. And also that ability to be able to be all things to all people. And sovereign's been mentioned a couple of times, and no doubt we'll discuss what is sovereignty. But having that capability to be able to shut yourself off from the world and just have your own waveform and no one else's, but then still be able to switch across to somebody else's waveform, an open waveform at the same time, like either at the same time or instead of, I think that is going to be key. So having that ability to switch between multiple orbit, multiple frequency at will, with beam hopping and all the other good stuff, that's going to be the killer application. But as Bob said, really the flat panels they're great, but then you introduce other problems as well. So it's a real double-edged sword, and it's going to be an interesting ride over the next decade.
I totally agree in terms of both those answers. There are a lot of things happening, but it's solving those two areas. I mean, just popping into the waveform development area, I know we've been trying to get up a waveform test bed capability at the STL, so we can test the vulnerability of all sorts of different waveforms. But there's, exactly as Bob said, how do you start to specify that so it's portable between different SDR solutions, that is also verifiable as a a government security product as well. So some really interesting challenges that go with that. And having done one of the first X-band phased array comms on the move solution back in 1987, a long time ago, they've been around for a long while and will get better and better, and they are. But we've still got a journey to go. Right, I'm going to go to the wider open questions, and some fantastic questions coming in. First one from Ian Nichols. Is the PACE model still utilized given the rise of SD-WAN? And is it doing that proactive monitoring of links and utilizing many links at once? Who wants to have a go at that? Dave?
Yeah, I'll take that one and say yes, it is, because even with SD-WAN, you still need the backhauls and you still need sort of other connectivity in there. So there will be a PACE element in there. But that's a really interesting one, that actually the PACE plan, we still talk about it, but actually there's a lot of governments and organizations are moving to PAN. You have your primary, which is normally some sort of commercial, forward-looking, high throughput offering. You then have your alternate, which is a high resilient, very, it'll be much lower bandwidth, but very resilient. And then you have the N, none. So you have to get used to working with that capability. So yeah, I'd say absolutely it's still relevant, but with the advent of different technologies, you just have to tune that depending on how you're going to use it. And it's never going to be 4 options. There'll be way more than 4, and that's just a nice model that we all tend to use.
And I think, to add into what Dave just said there, don't always assume from a government and a defence perspective that the core hardened mil-satcom is the primary. There is an awful lot of commercial satcom used to deliver the frontline capabilities as we go. Any other views on that, or shall I move to the next question? Cool. There's a next question from Antti Shijans. Apologies if I've pronounced your name wrong. Thank you for the discussion. How do you see the role of NTN in the future? What role will it play, and what role will it do in secure and defence communications? Stuart, I think I'd pass to you in that one, and then also interested in a view from Andrew as well.
Yeah, this is a multifaceted topic, of course. We are certainly looking to, in context of IRIS, and what we've recently announced, Meosphere, which is the outgrowth of our global MEO constellation, which IRIS will be the first portion of that. We're looking to introduce the ability to support these kind of capabilities, in particular 5G. And we're also looking to support 5G even on some of the GEO, as they're somewhat called software-defined satellites going forward. How much? I mean, some of this better lends itself to LEO rather than other orbits, but it's definitely part of the overall puzzle. How much the governments adopt it, I think that's going to be an interesting take. And the other one, I think, that is very much coming to market, which we're also working on, is direct-to-device capability. How that fits into the government portfolio and what they can do with it. I think that's another rich area for investigation.
Andrew?
Yeah, so I think, like every manufacturer and every operator, we're looking into it with great vigor and vim, because it's the current new shiny thing. So we are investigating it. We're working with partners on it. We're trying to work out what goes on. I think so. That's the MBA view. I think my personal view, not linked to the company, it reminds me very, very much of the early 90s when we all started thinking about LEOs the first time and handheld satellite phones. And everybody thought it was the great thing. And we all rushed around doing it. And lots of us remember all the different companies' names that didn't happen and the ones that did happen. It feels a bit like that. We know it's coming. Everybody's rushing to do it. Probably the first ones won't get the business case right, won't get the market right, won't get the use cases right. But eventually, we're all going to have NTN, we're all going to have 5G from space, we're all going to have D2D. I don't know when it will happen, and I don't know what the really, really valid use case will be. I do think personally the D2D is more likely to be a defense application than a commercial application. I still think, do I really want SATCOM when I'm sat in an airplane across the Atlantic? Not really. Am I ever going to pay for it? Not really. And lo and behold, most of it's now free and we don't see the cost. You know, D2D for somebody like me feels a bit like that. When it's free, I might use it. For defense users, I could see a real application. The ability to go anywhere, do anything, have the ability to connect. It's kind of been what we've all talked about on this panel in our careers all our life. And we've found different ways of solving that puzzle. So I do think it's coming. I probably think that we're a little bit further away than maybe the hype, but that is totally a personal view. And obviously, we're all working very hard to make it happen fast.
Thank you, Andrew. And again, I will add a bit further on that, that it's been around, as you say, since the 90s. Iridium, I can remember putting Iridium onto C-130 and doing the first ever connection between a C-130 flying over the Med and to a Canadian Orion surveillance aircraft flying straight over the top of the North Pole. So it's been there. It's how do we use it better going forward? So I fully agree with your views there. There's another question here from Mr. Anonymous Attendee. It's always good to try and find out who's asking the questions, but we'll go with that. There's two parts. What specific defense and security challenges are you seeing SATCOM solve? And I'm quite happy to have a go at that, which is really critical C2 of lots of mobile deployed platforms. Welfare is absolutely critical, and massive data distribution and getting the information into the end user's hands as fast as is possible so that those decisions can be made before the enemy gets inside your OODA loop. So that's the sort of the defense view on life. The second part of the question is, how are your ground segment and multi-orbit technologies evolving? And I think Bob started to cover that, so I'll hand that one over to Bob to answer that.
Yes, I mean, the antennas are becoming, or the ground terminals, I should say, are becoming ever more flexible. It won't be long before we start seeing in rapid deploy terminals, because they're already available in fixed installations of multi-band feeds. So you can easily switch between, let's say, X and KA, or if we're talking commercial, maybe KU and KA. And that provides resiliency. It provides greater flexibility for alternative comms by being able to switch, let's say, from one orbital position of KU to another KA, pick up LEO constellations in either band. So in that sense, I think we're already there in terms of ground terminals providing that flexibility. Now, the next part is flat panels. We've talked about flat panels. Flat panels are absolutely tremendous if we're really talking about LEO and MEO, especially medium density and high density, because they're not scanning very far. I think anyone of us that's tried to go from a LEO to a GEO with a flat panel would know that one of the issues is scan loss. And that's a bit of an issue. I mean, there are other issues, but there are always ways and means of solving these issues, either with mechanical help or just make the panel bigger. But I think when it comes to security and defense, being offered the flexibility of simultaneous, multi-band, multi-beam, and we're not that far away.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Another question from Glenn Tehofse. considering the topic of responsive space, the ability to rapidly deploy assets into orbit as replacement or extension or an enhancement of your system, is this being considered as part of the SATCOM domain? It's how quickly do you replenish what you're doing today? Andrew, I think you're probably pretty well placed on that one.
Is it being considered? I think it's being considered for everything, not just SATCOMs.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole proliferation is probably too adventurous a word. The interest globally in alternative launch sites and launch providers indicates that people believe that there is a really big appetite globally for a faster launch capability than the traditional ones and more choice than just Falcon 9. So I think that answers itself. In terms of, do we really need it? I mean, if you take away all of the Starlink satellites, we probably don't need loads and loads and loads of rockets. But in the future, you're seeing some of the new space companies manufacture, test, and launch fairly capable. I nearly said highly, but that's probably too ambitious. Fairly capable operational capability at a very, very high pace. Open Cosmos last week launched 2 satellites that probably very few people knew they were building. And they only got the frequencies to use them a couple of weeks before. So I think companies are advancing at pace, manufacturing of satellites that aren't demo satellites. They're not testing capability. They're real operational capability in Earth observation and SATCOMs. And there are capabilities being designed, defined, and put into place to launch those capabilities more rapidly. Is everything a fully combined ecosystem where a general can go, I want to buy that in 3 months' time and I want to launch it from Saxavord in Northern Scotland? No. But that's the vision, and that's what people are working on. That's what the UK has been working on for the last, I don't know, 5, 10 years. It is going to happen in the next decade. We are going to see rapid responsiveness to launching new capabilities. And I think that can only be good for the customer base. It puts a bit of pressure on manufacturers, but I think it's good news. So yes, it's going to happen.
Yeah, I'd just like to add one thing to that as well, is the fact that the high altitude platform is going to play a key role in this. They're much quicker to get out there. You can put multiple in certain areas. So I think high altitude platforms will absolutely play a key part of this. But also we're going to see more and more of this software defined satellites, which can be re-rolled mid-mission, that can allow you to deploy different depending on what's happening on the ground. So I think both of those elements will be a fast response time.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And VLEO as well, very low Earth orbit is in between. I think the other thing is, we are seeing a hybridization of space. We're talking about SATCOMs now, but if we end up with the ability to clean the orbits much more safely and more predictably in the future, either by deorbiting them and getting them to burn up without affecting the atmosphere or the oceans, or by graveyarding them or collecting them in space, then you're going to start to see in orbit lifetimes come down rapidly. We're already seeing the US launching satellites that have a couple of years lifetime. We're not quite there yet, but you will see. At the moment, the sweet spot is 5-ish years for LEO, 15 years for GEO. That's going to come down if there's a more sustainable way of cleaning the orbits and making sure we don't mess it up. So I think, I don't know how fast it's weird. You're asking a question about going faster. I don't know how fast it's going to appear, but you are going to see everything coalesce into a space ecosystem, which is massively exciting.
So there's another question here, sort of coming back onto Dave's comments. Sort of, how will anyone be able to reduce the size of their terminals if Starlink has occupied all of the low-level orbits? I presume the intonation there is very much, well, there's going to be a hell of a lot of interference at KU band. So how is everyone else going to fit in when it becomes even more congested? I don't know. Did you want to have a go answering that, Dave? Or
yeah, a very quick one. 2 letters: QV.
Which leads me on to the next question. You're reading the questions list, aren't you, coming in? And I'm going to go to initially Stuart on this one, where we're seeing a shift in the commercial constellations to frequencies above Ka band. And for the military, that's mil Ka band and commercial Ka band with Q, V, E, and even W band. Is there a similar direction of travel in defence for that given advantage of AJ and intercept? I would add a bit further on that, having been involved, that it's great going to high frequencies, but there's this horrible thing called rain that means you've got to have an operational tactical environment. So I'd pass the open question on QV and W and its applicability. Stuart, any views on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, how the bands are used and what they bring to the table. For years before I joined O3B, I was managing SCS's customer delivery, and one of the biggest topics we spent every day was interference in KU band, and not deliberate. It's just poorly installed antennas, poorly terminated cables that were just creating problems. And then we moved to MEO Ka band, and it was very quiet. That doesn't last forever. Other people come in, but it does bring it. But as you say, the higher frequencies come with other disadvantages, if you will, that they're going to be more susceptible to weather, etc. So it's using the right solutions in the right way. And we all know the military domain is still really interested in UHF. So these things are not disappearing. It's going to be a mix. We're certainly looking to put Ka band, QVE, and Ku band at GEO, and the Ka band QV in some of the non-GEO terminals. Look, one of the things that I meant to jump in on the prior comment about replacing satellites, one of the things with non-GEO is it's not because you need lots and lots of satellite per se, but the manufacturing regime that requires, which Starlink have really shown the way of vertical integration. I'm not saying everyone's going to become vertically integrated, but the fact you're pushing lots of satellites out mean you are not launching one satellite and then 25 years later replacing it. You are constantly feeding and upgrading and introducing new technologies to the constellations, and having a continual delivery process that can bring these new technologies, new frequency bands, etc., is going to be a key aspect of industry going forward. And I think some of the operators wanting to take more control of that. It's in the public domain that we're starting to do some of our own manufacturing in Luxembourg. There's a reason for that. It won't be across the board, but in specific areas, it allows us to make sure we can keep feeding that strategic growth of the capability.
Thanks, Stuart. Bob, how do you think it's going to impact the terminal world of going QVEW?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about your margins for rain fade and so on. But I sort of latched in on the fact that beams will get narrower, which means there's going to have to be cleverer ways of pointing and tracking, whether it's especially if it's LEO. At the moment we're tracking Ka perfectly well. But by the time you get to 50 gigs or even 80 gigs, how narrow is that beam going to be? So that's the kind of challenge I was looking at, rather than worrying about rain. I think we've got other ways of dealing with rain, whether it's adaptive coding, or changing power levels, and I'm assuming that the other will create other ways of dealing with that in the future. But pointing and tracking is going to be the challenge.
And got more questions coming through. One from Graham Meek, which I think is an interesting one. Good afternoon, Meeky. How are you? The biggest issues he's experienced with the military environment is that lack of continuity of personnel. Do you see this changing as we go forward? Is there any good advice to feed into governments on speeding up their procurement route by not having personnel changing? I've got a view with what's happening in the UK with the massive changes to defence that have literally just happened, with not just defence reform, but how things have changed. But I'm really interested on the wider interesting industry view on that. I'll go to Andrew first, and then Dave.
That's a hospital pass.
It is. Sorry, that's a beer I owe you.
No, I think it's an easy one to answer. I mean, it's the way it's always been, and it's one of the biggest challenges we've ever had in the defence technology world. You know, we really struggle to keep that continuity. That it's not always across the board. There've always been one or two people who have fought hard to stay within the family of space within the either the uniform personnel or the civil service. And that's kept the continuity going. I think how do you deal with it? You know, I think my view on how to deal with it is to stop thinking about the requirements and start thinking about the concept of operations. Yeah, I think I'm very irritated that we've kind of lost the plot with how to write a ConOps particularly in the UK. And if you can write a good ConOps, nobody really cares what you build. You've built something that can deliver that ConOps. And whilst not every user understands the requirements in order to buy the right thing, they all understand what they want to do and what the concept of operations is. And I think, you know, back to the conversation right at the beginning of this webinar about collaboration, cooperation, getting the right feedback from government, concept of operations, concept of use, they're the two things that we've, I think, particularly lost the ability to really have a direct conversation, and that's how I would fix it. And then, you know, the 3 years rotation, it becomes something that you wish you could fix, but it's not a killer like it is today.
And I think I'll add to that. There's two elements to this. The first is the procurement side, and actually having a lot of that done by civil servants that are consistent and do maintain that that knowledge, I think, is key. And then having the people that change around every sort of like 2 to 3 years in uniform advising them just means you get different views, which is healthy. But I think the other side of this is the end user. And that's one of the key things where I think coming back to that A3, the AI, automation, and analytics, you make everything on the ground much easier to use, which means the training burden is much less. They don't care about having to learn about 5 different terminals because everything's in one single device, and then you just press a button and it goes across to the other waveform. Or in an ideal world, it does it automatically without the end user knowing about it. So I think simplifying that end user terminal is key to that sort of discussion there.
Okay, there's a question from Shahida. Hi, Shahida Barrick. What are the panelists' view on why the UK won't pay to join the European Union's 150 billion Europe Security Action for Europe regulation? I must admit that's the first time I've heard of it. So, but that's apologies. That's me being buried in a defence land. Any views on that?
Well, I'll start. I think, you know, it's the SAFE initiative you're talking about, Sheila, isn't it? So
Yeah.
I think I'm not a politician. I don't write policy. But I do know how hard it is for politicians to talk about anything to do with Europe. I think we will probably end up joining it. You know, my parent company's country, Canada, has joined it. But I think we probably have missed the timing to really shape what we wanted out of it. So I think we'll end up joining it because it's the right thing to do. I know we've been discussing it behind the scenes in Whitehall. I don't know what those discussions are, but my nervousness would be that, like you put in your final point on the question, that true collaboration, do we really want to be allied by design in the UK? We talk about it a lot. You know, I've heard Paul say it, he's heard me say it,
Yeah.
he's heard uniform people say it. But when push comes to shove, you know, we are currently sitting a little bit precariously between Europe, between America, potentially Canada, Japan, China today. I think the UK will need to decide, you know, which is its preferred alliance and what it's going to focus on. So I think to answer your question, we are going to join it. I hope we find a way to join the ERS initiative and maybe Iris Squared. There's a question on that as well we'll probably get to before we finish. I hope we find a way to join those because I think they will be backbones of the future for European sovereignty and European collaboration and defence.
And then the final one, because I noticed we've got 3 or 4 minutes left. That's a good answer, by the way, Andrew. I glad you took the politics because I'm not allowed to.
I know.
And what is your individual take on the European Irish Square project? Is it let's go to Dave first, then Bob, then Andrew, then Stuart, who I know is heavily engaged in it.
So the corporate view is that it's obviously a massive program, and it's going to be bringing some really powerful capabilities to the EU particularly. Personal view is it depends on very much how it's managed. At the moment, I think I've been quite surprised and quite pleased about the way it's been going. What we don't want is another Galileo, or another sort of, it just keeps going on and on and on and never really delivering sort of anything to the masses. So I hope we've learned the lessons from that. And I think actually from what I've seen, I think we're actually going in the right direction. And I think that capability is going to be very powerful. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. But at the moment, I'm hopeful.
Bob?
Yeah, kind of like Dave. We'll kind of watch this space and see where it goes. We've tried to get involved, but because we're based in the UK, we can't. So it is a case of watch. And I'm hopeful that Europe will be building its own capability and stand on its own 2 feet.
Andrew?
Yep, corporately, love to be involved, same as Bob and Dave. I think we have some capabilities that could really help. But last time I looked, Canada wasn't European either, same as UK. Personally, I think it's going too slowly and it's too confusing for people to understand what it does. So, like Dave, I hope that the work done to date is the foundation, and from here on, it can accelerate because the current in-service dates are not going to help anybody, quite frankly. That's personal view.
And Stuart, I'll let you counter that.
Well, it's absolutely wonderful, the whole thing. It's brilliant. Look, it's interesting, Paul, you say that I'm heavily involved. I can't work on it because
of course,
I'm not physically
SESR, yeah.
in Europe. I have worked on it before I moved back to the UK just over a year ago. It is, Dave, I think said it's important it doesn't become another Galileo, and I think that's been first and foremost in our thinking. We recognize the opportunity, and we are now in a very much important position controlling the MEO portion of this and developing, and we will seek to deliver on that. But we're going to make damn sure it also works for us. That it doesn't, if it goes off the rails because it becomes another Galileo, that we can still execute on our plans in the overlap of what we need to do. And frankly, what we need to do is also going to help drive that forward. So it's a symbiotic thing. It's a very important project for SES. It's a very important project for Europe, but it's complicated, it's challenging, multifaceted, and we just have to really, really be focused. And all I can say is I think I'm not leading it. After doing Empire, I couldn't have taken that on as well. So
it's amazing. You still only look 21, Stuart. How's that? Right. I think we've come to the end of our allotted time. I'd really love to say thank you to the panelists. You've been brilliant. Thank you to all the questions. I know there's a couple we didn't quite get there to answer, but we only have a short space of time to cover. But hopefully the viewers have enjoyed watching, listening to the views of these 4 fantastic global leading experts in the satellite field. So thanks all of you, and we'll see you probably all in GovSatcom in Luxembourg in a few weeks' time. Cheers all.